So I've just jumped into New Zealand Herald, into the Wellington section, and the first article is a picture of this squalid room somewhere with graffiti all over the place. Police forensic photos show how squatters were living in an abandoned Wellington building.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's just classic of what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's total sensationalism. And I'm not saying it's not real, but it's not typical.
It's a great example, Adam. It's a great example of the type of sensationalism we're talking about. Welcome to the LoweDown, Wellington's #1 real estate podcast. I'm back again with my friend, colleague and business partner, Adam Cockburn, and we're here to talk about the media's role in real estate and how it interplays with the market. So looking forward to this chat. How are you, Adam?
I'm doing good. It's always good to be here, having these chats. It's kind of like having a good time, and then everyone gets to see us goofing off.
Yes, that's right. And so, the media, obviously, I think probably the best way I describe the media's role in real estate is as an amplifier. If the market's going up, they're sort of, they're kind of the loudspeaker, aren't they? They kind of amplify things. And if the market's going down, they kind of, they sort of amplify it that direction as well. What do you think about that?
I mean, we were just talking before about how it seems to me that I think it's well understood that sensationalism sells media, right? I mean, at the end of the day, they're a business too, right? And they want to sell, they want to get a lot of eyeballs, and sometimes just the boring, plain old truth doesn't sell a lot. And what does sell a lot is sensationalism. So when the market's absolutely going gangbusters and prices are going crazy, and first home buyers can't get into the market, the headlines are often about how unfair it is because all the people who have property are just making so much money hand over fist, and it's just so easy. We're living on the pig's back and all that, and how unfair it is that the first home buyers can't get into the market. On the other hand, when the market is soft or it comes down like it has done in the last few years, like we've never really seen before, or certainly not in our generation, for a long time, it flips on its head, and it's sensationalism in the other direction. How unfair it is that people who bought at the top and now are upside down in terms of negative equity, or I don't know how dangerous it is. It just seems to be there's no balance. You know what I mean? So what happened to just good old boring reporting the facts rather than the sensationalism? I don't know.
Well, I know what you mean. I'll give you an example. I got a phone call from a reporter once who wanted some data. And it was asking me about the market and what I'd seen, and at the time we'd seen this enormous, it was pre-election, and we'd seen this enormous increase in buyer activity because no one was putting their house on the market before the election. And I'm like, this is the story, right? This is what's going on in the market. It's right at the coalface. I'm fascinated by it. It's an incredible thing that's going on, and we'd seen a 300% increase in buyer activity. And when I mentioned the fact that meant that the average amount of people with open homes had gone from 3 to 9. I literally listened to the reporter just to switch off immediately because the number of 3 to 9 just wasn't something was going to make a headline for him. It was so obvious.
So what were they? What was the reporter angling for?
Well, something more, if I'd said, we've gone from 3 to 40 people at an open home, it might have made, it was the number. It was obvious to me.
It's not nearly dramatic enough.
It wasn't dramatic enough.
The truth just wasn't dramatic enough.
Yeah, but I mean, and maybe I didn't frame it in the right way when I was talking to him because, maybe just a 300% increase in buyer activity, would have been enough to provide the headline for him. But it's just interesting that's what they are looking for is really just, which makes sense. I mean, headlines sell paper.
Yeah,
sure, right?
Sure.
So I get it. And then, of course, when we're reading these days and we're short attention spans and we're sort of reading fast, we're kind of scanning headlines and your brain is absorbing all this stuff, isn't it? And so, subconscious probably forming views on the sort of things about where the world is and where things are at based on even headlines alone, even without going deep and reading and at least reading the article. Yeah. And then when you read the article, it's also going to come with potentially bias as well as sensationalism, isn't it?
Of course. I mean, we're all biased. We're all biased, and we all look for evidence that our biases or our beliefs are correct or true. I mean, one of the very popular narratives that we've seen in the last, for many years now, I suppose, that has just it's been popularised by the media, and this is right on topic here, is everyone seems to know that we have a housing crisis, for example. And you were talking about just now about how everyone just basically just scanning the headlines and making and determining a picture of the way the world is, or determining a picture of a set of facts based on a set of headlines without actually verifying it or without actually digging deep into it. But everyone seems to know that there's a housing crisis. But I suspect that the vast majority of people, or almost no one, is actually fact checking that. And we see a story of someone living in a car or whatever, for example. And I mean that's an awful situation for that person, and that corroborates their theory that there's a housing crisis. But what is the housing crisis? I mean, what data actually is out there to support that? What do you think?
It's a great point, and I think that at the end of the day, there is I've seen, again, I'll give you an example. I've seen firsthand that sort of going back to bias. I can think of another time when I got called by a reporter, and that reporter is a young guy, won't name any names, of course, but probably at a guess, struggling to get on the housing market, or had troubles, or watching the housing market shoot away, probably didn't own a house.
So is this recently or a few years ago?
This will be last year.
Okay.
And I've actually read articles by this particular reporter many times, and just noticed significant bias towards negative articles, and the way that they're written is clearly coming from a position of wanting to some degree vilify the real estate industry, for its role or its supposed role in the housing crisis. So having experienced
in the housing crisis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so so I've seen firsthand that exact kind of thing as well.
Yeah. I mean, I saw an argument once. Oh, this would have been a couple of years ago now. But I thought it was a very good, a very sound argument, asking the question more than anything, like, is there actually a housing crisis, or what is the housing crisis? Because a few years ago, of course, there was a real shortage of property on the market. So the amount of the available supply of listings to purchase was very, very low, right? Because we were booming, and somehow people equated that with there are not enough houses in New Zealand. Well, that's not the same thing. It's just a number of houses that happen to be available for purchase. That's very different for the amount of houses available to live in, right? And anyway, this argument went along the lines of, if we had a housing crisis, if you assume a housing crisis means there is not enough houses to accommodate the population of the country, if it was getting worse and worse and worse, we would see the population we would see the multiple of population divided by the number of dwellings in the country getting higher and higher and higher. In other words, the average number of people living in the country per house. Whereas it's not the case. For decades, it's been around 2.7. And so that number is not changing. So that does not support this notion that there is a housing crisis. But the media has popularized this popular narrative that there obviously is a housing crisis. I'm not saying there is or there isn't, but that's just an argument that's based on data that suggests, well, maybe it isn't what we think.
So supply has caught up with population growth from what you can see in the numbers.
Yeah, it's kept pace. So the average number of people per household has remained fairly balanced, and that's taken from census data.
Yeah. So would you? From my perspective, the housing crisis is the concentration of wealth in the older generation, right? Like, that's what sort of, people talk about the boomers and how they've, sort of profited off housing.
Wrecked it for the younger people.
And now that housing is out of reach, I suppose, in terms of financially, and, obviously their time taken to pay off a mortgage these days. And they say it takes 10 years on average for someone to save a deposit. And then, of course, you may never pay off the debt, or the debt to pay off the debt might be another, 30 years on top of that or so. Do you feel that's different than previous generations?
Yeah, look, I'm not across that data. But I'm pretty sure I saw an article recently looking at those numbers. I think it might have been produced by CoreLogic. And the way they summarised it was essentially saying, we don't have a housing affordability crisis. We have a deposit raising crisis. So the ability to pay for a house once you own it is not that much different than it has been historically.
Because interest rates have come down so much, the cost of servicing the mortgage, and you're still...
Well, when you say down, you mean compared to decades.
Yeah.
That's right. We've had a structural decline in the
so while
interest rates.
Even though property prices have gone up, because interest rates are so much lower than they were when property prices were a lot cheaper. Therefore, you could...
We've talked about this many times, haven't we? That over the last 40 years... there's been a structural decline in interest rates. Now they go up and they go down and they go up and they go down, but the trend has been long-term down from the 1980s to now. We've gone from interest rates that were in the high teens to interest rates that were a few years ago, 3%, and incomes now more like 6%.
Yeah, and incomes, of course, have risen along with inflation over that time, and so although house prices have outpaced inflation during that period by quite a margin, incomes have gone up, and because interest rates have gone down, it would make sense that servicing is not as bad as getting a deposit, right? Like
Correct. But coming up with the money to start with, whether it be 10%, 20%, that's the thing that's taking the longest. So the actual affordability of the house once you own it is not much different, is what I understand. But the raising of the deposit is the hard part.
So there was a huge I saw something again in the paper, which is relevant to what we
when you say
we're
the
talking
paper,
about.
You mean on a website?
On the website, yeah, that's right.
It's still called a paper.
Yeah, that's right. But it talked about the percentage. You must have seen it as well. It talked about the percentage of people that were using the bank of mum and dad for their deposit.
Okay.
Did you see that? It was something. It was like 40% or so. It was some. I'm going to get that wrong, so that'll be wrong because I'm making.
But we're talking concepts here.
Concepts that it was a very.
It might not be factually correct, but conceptually correct.
Yeah. So it was a large amount of people. So of course, that it's a difficult one, that isn't it? Because it implies some sort of privilege in who your parents are, that they have that. But then if we're talking about the baby boomers and that generational divide, then that makes sense, doesn't it? That that's one way of human nature helping the next generation through that problem, right? Is by providing some capital.
For sure, and I suppose two things. Firstly, yes, if you are of that generation, you have children or grandchildren or whatever, and you have a balance sheet with a valuable property on it, or with maybe more than one, or some other assets, and you can lean on that and borrow some money to lend to your children to help them onto the ladder, so to speak. I mean, a lot of people want to do that, and many people would argue it's a good thing. But you can also understand the argument that implies some degree of privilege and being able to get it handed down from intergenerationally.
There's no guarantee your parents are going to do that, right? So we don't want a society where that's necessary, do we?
No, that's right.
No,
that's right. And you can't argue with that. Yeah, for sure. If you've come from a family that doesn't have any of that privilege, I suppose, then you certainly can be argued that you're at a disadvantage. Then again, one's background where you've actually seen some hardship and endured some hardship yourself and tasted firsthand the impact of such hardship can really what fortify your resolve to never go there again, and to rise from and break from tradition and work hard and get ahead that way. Whereas the kids of the privileged parents, perhaps they've never seen hardship, they take it easy, and those guys, decline. So, I mean, what I find really interesting, getting a little bit off topic from media here, but just thinking about this now, this is our generation's problem, but the next generation is going to have a different problem, because the R rate, or the replacement rate of population is in New Zealand is 1.8, and in I think in Europe now it's 1.5. And the replacement rate is like 2.1. 2.1
or 2.2?
Yep.
2.1.
Something like that.
Yeah, to account for people dying, right?
Yes.
Early.
Yep. So just to maintain the same population. Which is why we have to import people.
Exactly. So we're probably, New Zealand's probably in a lucky position in that regard, that we're a desirable place to live. So we have a comparative advantage where you can open the doors and use, a high quality immigration to kind of prop up the economy. Mm-hmm. But it is a real worry, isn't it? I mean, you think about this generation's problem being housing, and
Craig, this is a very big tangent.
Yes, I know. I know.
This is a huge tangent. Maybe we should put that as a separate topic, because that's a that's a major discussion, and I think we could definitely go for half an hour on that alone.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
But
Well, I just wanted to make the point that you have these generational differences that and due to structural things that are going on, and that'll be an interesting one for the next generation to deal with. But
100%.
Going back to the media, so obviously sensationalized headlines. What we're saying that's our point of view of what the housing crisis is.
Yep.
But there'll be a lot of people out there that see that have a totally different view as to what housing crisis means. Because of the getting most of their reading is being done online, and most of their reading is not going deep on a subject and looking at the actual data.
Headlines only, and it seems and social media, the rise of social media, which tends to be just little bites of information, and it's little bits of information that are taken out of context. Often it's 15-minute little video clips. People are getting their news from TikTok or whatever, and all out of context. No deep diving into stuff. Well, obviously not but way more just little bites of information. People determining their view of how the world works and what the truth is that way. And so people's attention span shortening and all this sort of stuff. And so where am I going with that? Well, I think it just becomes rarer and rarer, and therefore more and more valuable to develop your ability to think critically and actually assess and deep dive into something and determine what the facts are for yourself, rather than just assuming that what the headlines say is the truth or does represent the facts correctly.
In terms of the role of social media is interesting, right? Because, and you mentioned before, we had a bit of a laugh that I said the paper when I was talking about online sources of news, because we're showing my age there. But the next generation are probably barely even looking at the online news. They'll be going straight to social media and getting all of their content from social media.
Yes,
what do you think? How do you think that interplays with the role of media and the future of the real estate market?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm showing my age now, and I despair over that, because I remember recently, there's some natural disaster somewhere or other, and I asked one of my kids, at the time, I think she would have been 16, she's 17 now, but I asked one of my kids, did you hear about the earthquake, or did you hear about the floods or something or other? And she said, oh yeah, I know all about that. And I was curious. I was like, well, how do you know about that? And she said, I saw it on TikTok. And I was just like, oh my God, people are getting their news on TikTok. And no doubt it does spread to those channels. But again, my concern is that are they stopping and asking, is this a reliable source of factual information? And I think people are really jumping to conclusions and determining the way the world is and what the facts are based on the most tiniest clips of data, which, I mean, it could be all deep fake AI, and indeed there's been a lot of talk about that in terms of influencing people's opinions over things like election results and voting and so on, right? So I just think the ability for people to think critically, it's almost like that part of the brain is like shriveling up, and I think it's so valuable. And also, I don't know. For me, I get a lot of enjoyment out of really diving into something and really understanding it and determining what the facts are, what's the truth. And I personally get enjoyment out of I don't know, my own sense of what's really happening in the world, or what the actual truth is, as opposed to the popular narrative, which often there's a bit of a difference between that and the truth. So
I mean, it's interesting. I agree with you. I mean, I think I'm really worried about social media for the future. I think there's so far it seems like a net negative to me that attention spans are getting shorter and people are just being influenced easier. But I have been interested to have jumped on X recently.
Yep.
And seen how that. I mean, I wasn't on Twitter at all. Jumped on that just out of curiosity, and was quite impressed with the way that the community notes work. So they have a system where when there's and it's a very news heavy type of my understanding, compared to like the Instagrams and the TikToks, I think X is quite news heavy.
Yep.
And they have a system there where they have readers are able to tag things that they think is misinformation, and then they have a community notes team that come in and will actually fact check and then if something appears to be fake news or be incorrect, they will write a little bit of a synopsis on why it's incorrect and point people to the correct sources of information. And I was really impressed. It was like,
that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was real time.
I haven't checked it out. And that sounds amazing.
And it was sort of like crowdsourced real time fact checking.
Yes.
Which really gave it a different flavor from a pure kind of I don't know, just a cesspit of stuff. And by sort of crowdsourcing it, I think it does allow potentially some sort of, ability to kind of avoid perhaps an individual's bias, if that makes sense. It may still be bias, still ability for groupthink to happen, but at least one individual's perspective may not be enough.
So it almost becomes like a self-regulating community.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I was quite impressed with that. And, I noticed that even like Elon Musk, who owns the thing, and obviously, he's sort of a bit controversial at the moment with his foray into politics, which I find a bit disheartening for someone of his influence and position. But regardless of what you think of him, even his own things on X, which he owns, were getting community noted if they were incorrect. So great example of how even influence and power wasn't enough to
can be regulated
through crowdsourcing that. So anyway, this was an interesting.
And what about we were talking again, but just before about the role of the media in a modern democracy, right? For a long time, this is not new by any means, but for a long time, the media has really held an important role in kind of keeping people on account, holding people to account. What do you think about that? Is that still the case?
Obviously, the media has played a massive role in free speech and in democracy in terms of accountability for the powers that be and a voice for the people. It's an important part of it. But that's a great point. I don't know how social media interplays with that, other than it's probably even better in some respects of being a voice for the people, because anybody can be. They are
the people.
They are the people, right? So from that perspective, I suppose it's even a kind of a deeper form of the same kind of checks and balances that the media provide in a modern democracy.
Yeah, but for it to do its job effectively in that regard, it has to be independent.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yes, that's exactly right. And I think perhaps they haven't been. Perhaps there is significant bias in some of that stuff in the past. Which
there's always going to be bias everywhere you go, isn't there? It's just a question of is it being influenced too much by, I don't know, one political view, or I don't know if they're getting too much funding from some community that is particularly left leaning or right leaning, or so I've just jumped into New Zealand Herald and into the Wellington section, and the top article, the first article, is a picture of this squalid room somewhere with graffiti all over the place. Police forensic photos show how squatters were living in an abandoned Wellington building. Right?
Yeah.
So that's, I don't know, that's just classic of what we're talking about, isn't it? Yeah. It's total sensationalism. Now, I haven't read the article, but obviously there are situations like that where it's horrific living conditions.
Yeah.
But the facts of the rental market at the moment are we have never seen so much supply of empty properties that are available for tenants to live in. Affordability of rentals in Wellington has never been better since 1992. Now, obviously, this is on average. Okay, there's always going to be people in awful situations, and we have been dealing with a lot of hardship lately with cost of living and inflation and interest rates going up and all this sort of thing. But on average, rentals are cheaper now than they have been for 32 years since 1992, since this data started getting captured.
Relative to incomes.
Relative to incomes.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the price, the number of dollars.
Yeah.
I'm talking about relative to household income. It's barely more than 20%.
Yeah.
Whereas typically it's about 24, 25%, something like that, and it's never been this low.
Yeah.
So
looking at that headline, you would never believe that was the case.
No. How many views would it get if the New Zealand Herald was saying, "Great news, guys! Wellington rents have never been more affordable." That's so boring.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
It's way more interesting to this photo of this graffiti-ridden squalor of a concrete building somewhere or other. And I'm not saying it's not real, but it's not typical.
It's a great example, Adam. It's a great example of the type of sensationalism we're talking about.
Yeah.
Just to wrap this up, in terms of the media's role in the local real estate game in Wellington here, we see a lot of very positive articles starting to come out as the market's starting to turn. Now, one thing we know is that the media can't control the market as much as they can be a bit of an amplifier in terms of what the market's doing. You know, it doesn't matter what articles go in there, the market will be driven by supply and demand. We're the biggest drivers, and the media will be a layer over the top in terms of amplifying whatever is currently going on, and that will probably be like that forever.
I mean, I think it's quite popular. A lot of people have some view that the media actually drives the market in the same way they think that real estate agents drive the market.
Exactly, and that's just not true.
You know, unfortunately.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
No,
It'd be nice to have
very
some influence, wouldn't it?
Very fortunately, I shouldn't say that. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
Great, nice to chat, Adam.
Awesome. Good talk as always.
That was LoweDown. Thanks very much for listening. Like and subscribe. We'll be doing more of these next week. Thank you.
Cheers.